My name is Carter Lennox, and at 58, I stood in my father's living room and watched my whole family decide I was worth exactly one envelope. The lawyer gave my brother the house, the cash, Dad's truck. Then he slid a thin white envelope across the table to me, and the whole room tried not to laugh. My dad raised 2 sons in that little town. Damon wore the suits and posted the photos. I was the one who stayed. So that morning, my family looked at me the way you look at a man who lost. My brother patted my shoulder. My sister-in-law whispered that it was such a shame. I didn't know what was in that envelope yet. Neither did they. But every smiling face in that room was about to freeze, because my father left the worthless son, the one thing that would flip all of them. Before I show you what was inside, take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now let me take you back to that gray November morning, the day they read my father's will. The living room hadn't changed in 14 years. Same brown couch, same clock that ran 4 minutes fast. I'd spent 14 years in that house. I could have walked it blindfolded. I stood by the window with sawdust still in my sleeve. I'd been at the mill since 5 that morning. Grief doesn't stop the orders from coming in, and the crew still needed paychecks. The family filled every chair. Cousins I saw twice a year, aunts who called me Poor Carter like it was my first name. Damon sat up front, of course, in Dad's old reading chair, one ankle crossed over his knee. Ranata sat beside him, in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly payroll. The lawyer was a quiet man named Mr. Whitfield. He set a leather folder on the coffee table and clicked his pen. Everyone leaned in. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know this is a hard week." Someone sniffled. Someone else checked their phone. I watched their faces more than I watched him, and I saw something I'd seen my whole life. They'd already decided how this would go. You could read it in the room like a weather report. Damon gets the house, Damon gets the money, Carter gets a handshake and a thank you. They'd priced me before the will was even opened. Damon caught my eye and gave me a small, sad smile, the kind you give a man before you tell him bad news. I didn't smile back. I just held his gaze until he looked away. Mr. Whitfield turned to the first page. He cleared his throat and looked up at all of us. "We'll start with the primary estate," he said. The clock ticked 4 minutes fast, and the whole room went still. Mr. Whitfield read slowly, the way careful men do. "The primary residence at 14 Foster Lane," he said, "is left to Damon Lennox." A soft murmur moved through the room. Damon nodded like he'd expected nothing less. Ranata reached over and squeezed his hand. "The savings and investment accounts," Whitfield continued, "totaling the liquid estate, are also left to Damon Lennox." That got a reaction. A little gasp, a few glances my way. My aunt pressed her fingers to her mouth. I kept my face flat. Sawdust on my sleeve, hands loose at my sides. "The 2019 pickup truck," Whitfield said, "is left to Damon Lennox. 3 for 3. The house, the money, the truck. My father's whole life handed across the room to the son who'd left." Then Whitfield paused. He looked at me over his glasses. "To my son, Carter Lennox," he read, "I leave the contents of this envelope." He lifted a plain white envelope from the folder, no thickness to it, no weight. He slid it across the coffee table toward me, and it stopped just short of the edge. The room didn't know what to do. A cousin laughed and covered it with a cough. Ranata let out a slow, theatrical, "Oh," her hand on her chest like she was watching a puppy get left in the rain. I looked at the envelope. I didn't reach for it yet. Damon leaned toward me, voice warm and loud enough for everyone. "Don't worry, little brother," he said. "We'll take care of you." A few people nodded, comforted. The good son looking after the lost one. It was a nice picture. Everybody loved it. I let it sit, because I was already doing the math on 14 years and the numbers didn't match their faces. Let me tell you how I ended up the one with sawdust on his sleeve. 14 years back, my father sat me down in the mill office. He was 62 then and gray in the face. The doctors had found something in his blood, and the mill was drowning in debt he'd hidden from everyone. "I can't run it anymore, son," he said, "and your brother's got his big plans in the city." Damon did have plans. Damon always had plans. He was 3 years older and built for rooms full of people. When Dad asked him to come home and help, Damon said the timing was wrong. It was always the wrong timing with Damon. So I stayed. I gave up a shot at my own contracting business. I took over the books that didn't balance. Some months I paid the crew out of my own pocket and told them the account was just slow. I learned to sign paychecks with a steady hand, even when my stomach wasn't steady at all. Then Mom got sick too. Kidneys. 3 days a week for 7 years I drove her to dialysis and back. Same route, same waiting room, same vending machine coffee. I held her purse while they hooked up the lines. She'd pat my hand and call me her quiet one. There were papers too in those last years. Dad kept handing me things to sign. Tax forms, he said. Just formalities. I signed them without reading. I trusted him, and I was tired. My daughter Sophie asked me about it once, years later. Dad, you never once complained, she said. Not once. I told her complaining doesn't cut lumber. But the truth is simpler. I thought the work was the way you showed love. I didn't know they were keeping score. While I ran the mill, Damon ran a highlight reel. He'd moved to the city and gotten into furniture distribution. Big showrooms, bigger talk. Every few months he'd roll into town in a new car, take everyone to dinner, and hold the whole table in his hand. I watched my parents light up around him. Dad would pull out his phone and show the neighbors photos Damon had sent. Damon at a trade show. Damon shaking hands with somebody important. Damon on a boat that may or may not have been his. That's my oldest, Dad would say, always thinking big. Then he'd nod at me. Carter's got the mill. He's a steady one. Steady. That was my word. Damon got big. I got steady, which in my family meant a man with no ambition who was lucky to have a job at all. Ranata was worse, in her own soft way. She'd find me at every gathering and touch my arm. You work so hard for so little, she'd say, tilting her head. It's admirable, really. I learned to say thank you and change the subject. Here's the thing I noticed, though. Damon only ever came home when there was an audience. Christmas, birthdays, the anniversary party. Never a random Tuesday. Never when Mom was throwing up in the dialysis parking lot. Never when the furnace died at the mill and I slept there to watch the pipes. He performed being a son. I just was one. And to a room full of people, performance always looks better. One night near the end, I came to the house late to drop off Dad's medication. The door was cracked. I heard Damon's voice from the bedroom, low and urgent, saying something I wasn't meant to hear. I stopped in the hallway and listened. Those last few weeks, Damon was around more than he'd been in years. That should have told me something. Damon didn't do bedside vigils, but suddenly he was at the house 3-4 times a week, always with a leather bag, always with a man in a suit who turned out to be his own lawyer. Dad was fading by then. Some days he knew me, some days he called me by his brother's name. And on those foggy days, Damon would sit close and slide papers under his hand and guide the pen. The night I stood in the hallway, I heard my brother's voice through the cracked door. The expansion can't wait, Dad, he was saying. I need this lockdown now. I didn't understand it then. Expansion of what? Lockdown. How? Dad's voice came back thin and confused, asking about me, asking if I'd been fed. Carter doesn't need much, Damon said. He's happy with the workshop. Happy with the workshop, like it was a hobby. Like 14 years was a man playing with wood. I stepped in and set the medication on the dresser. Damon looked up, smooth as ever, and folded the papers into his bag before I could see them. Just some estate housekeeping, he said. Boring stuff. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. That was the whole problem. Dad reached for my hand. His grip was almost nothing now. You're a good boy, Carter, he whispered. Better than you know. Damon smiled at me over the bed patient, and kind the way you smile at a child who wandered into an adult conversation. I drove home that night with a bad feeling I couldn't name. Something was moving in that house. I just couldn't see the shape of it yet. The night before he died, my father was clear, for the first time in weeks. It happens sometimes, the nurses told me later. A window opens right at the end. His eyes found mine and stayed there, sharp and awake, and he squeezed my hand harder than he had in months. "Carter," he said, "come close." I pulled the chair to the bed. My Uncle Ray was in the corner, my father's younger brother, 70 years old and quiet as a fence post. "I did something," Dad said, "and it's going to look wrong at first." "Look wrong how?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "You'll understand why when the time comes. Just promise me one thing." "Anything." "Don't let them rush you, and don't let them sell it." His fingers tightened. "Whatever they say, whatever it looks like, don't let them sell what's yours." I didn't know what "it" was. I thought maybe the fever had him. "Sell what, Dad?" But his eyes were already drifting toward the window, toward the dark. "Ray knows," he said. "Ray was there. He'll tell you when you're ready." I looked over at Uncle Ray. He gave me one slow nod, the kind that carries weight. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing, son," Ray said. "Hold on to that." I sat with Dad until his breathing evened into sleep. I held his hand, and I thought about the papers, the whispers, the lawyer in the suit. Nothing added up. He passed just before dawn, with me on one side and Ray on the other. Damon arrived an hour later, already on the phone. I carried my father's last words around for a week, without understanding a single one of them. And the envelope hadn't even been opened yet. Back in the living room, the envelope still sat on the coffee table. "Well," Ranata said brightly, "aren't you going to open it?" She had her phone half raised. I noticed that. She wanted to film my face when I found out I'd gotten nothing. The whole room was watching now. A dozen relatives leaning in, waiting for the sad little reveal. Poor Carter and his empty envelope. It would make a good story at Thanksgiving. I reached over and picked it up, light as a leaf. I turned it once in my hand and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. "I'll open it when I'm ready," I said. The room deflated. That wasn't the show they wanted. "Come on," Damon said, laughing. "Don't be dramatic. Let's see what Dad left you." "It's mine to open," I said, "not yours to watch." Something crossed his face then, just for a second. Not amusement, not pity, something tighter. His jaw set and his eyes went to my jacket pocket and stayed there a beat too long. That was the first crack. My brother, who had just inherited everything, suddenly looked like a man worried about the one thing he hadn't gotten. "Suit yourself," he said, recovering his smile. "Always did like doing things the hard way." Ranata lowered her phone, disappointed. Mr. Whitfield gathered his folder and gave me a small, unreadable look on his way out, almost like he knew something, too. I shook a few hands. I accepted a few, "Let us know if you need anythings." Then I walked out to my truck with the envelope against my chest and my father's voice in my ears. "Don't let them sell what's yours." I still didn't know what was mine, but Damon's face told me it was worth more than the whole rest of that room. The knife came out 2 days after the funeral. Damon showed up at the mill in a charcoal coat, stepping around the mud like it might bite him. He looked at the stacks of lumber, the crew, the old sign over the door, and I watched him do the math too. "Place looks tired," he said. "You must be exhausted carrying all this." "I manage," I said. He leaned against a workbench and got to the point, because Damon always did once the small talk was spent. "Here's what I'm thinking," he said. "The mill's part of the estate mess. It's simpler if it's all under one name. I'll buy out your share, clean and easy." He named a number. It was an insult, wearing a suit. Less than the equipment was worth, never mind the land. "That's low," I said. "It's a debt pit, Carter. I'm doing you a favor." He spread his hands. "You walk away with cash, no more sleepless nights, no more payroll on your own dime." Ranata had come with him. She drifted over, running one gloved finger along a dusty rail. "It's just a debt anyway," she said. "Why would you want to keep it?" I looked at the two of them, standing in the place that had eaten 14 years of my life, calling it garbage, while trying very hard to own it. "Why do you want it so badly?" I said slowly. "If it's such a debt." Damon's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. "I don't want it," he said. "I want to help you. There's a difference." "Then let me think about it," I said. He didn't like that. He wanted a yes in the mud that day. He left me his card, told me not to be stubborn, and drove off too fast down the gravel. He needed this mill. I just didn't know why yet. That night, I opened the envelope alone. The crew had gone home, the saws were quiet. I sat at the metal desk in the office, under the one lamp that worked, and finally slid my thumb under the flap. There was no money inside. I don't know what I had expected. A check, maybe? A note that said, "Sorry, son?" Instead, there was a single folded document, thick and official, with a notary's stamp pressed into the corner, and behind it, a handwritten letter in my father's shaking hand. I read the document first. My eyes moved over the legal language twice before it landed. It was a transfer of ownership. Full 100% ownership of Lennox & Sons Mill, signed, witnessed, and notarized 2 years earlier, signed over to me. Not the house, not the money, but the mill, the land, the whole operation, already legally mine and had been for 2 years. I sat back in the chair. The lamp buzzed. Somewhere outside, a truck passed on the highway. They'd handed Damon the house and the cash in front of the whole family. They'd slid me an envelope like a consolation prize. And the envelope held the deed to the one thing my father wanted me to have all along. Then I unfolded the letter. His handwriting was worse than I remembered, but I could read it. The first line stopped my breath. "Carter," it began. "By the time you read this, the mill is worth more than they'll ever guess. Hold the line." Worth more than they'll ever guess. The mill. The tired, muddy, debt-choked mill that Damon called a pit and Ranata called garbage. I read the line again. Then again. My father had known something. He'd built something under my feet, and he'd sealed it in an envelope no one thought to fight over. I turned the page to find out what. The letter went on in my father's slow, careful hand. "I know how this will look," he wrote. "I know they'll laugh, and I know Damon will smile that smile. Let them. I'm not dividing my love. I'm giving each of you what you actually need." He wrote about Damon plainly, the way he never spoke out loud. "Your brother wears a beautiful coat over an empty closet. He needs to be seen to be the big man, to hold the house and the money and show it off. So I gave him that. It's what he was always going to take anyway." Then he wrote about me. "You never asked for anything. You just stayed. You kept this place breathing when I couldn't. You held your mother's hand for 7 years and never sent me a bill. A man like that doesn't need a house handed to him. He needs the thing worth keeping." My throat closed up. I hadn't cried at the funeral. I nearly did at that desk. "The mill is not what it looks like," the letter said. "In the last 2 years, I made a deal. A quiet one. There's a contract you haven't read yet in the gray folder in the safe. Read it. Then you'll understand why I told you not to let them sell." I looked up at the old safe in the corner. It had sat there for decades. I kept spare keys and insurance papers in it. I'd never thought twice about a gray folder. "Whatever you do," the letter ended, "don't rush, and don't explain yourself to people who never earned the explanation. Let the truth arrive on its own. It always does. Hold the line, son. I love you. Dad." I set the letter down with hands that weren't quite steady. Then I crossed the room and knelt in front of the safe. The safe took 3 tries. My hands weren't cooperating. Inside, behind the insurance binder, was a gray folder I'd genuinely never noticed. Plain, unmarked, heavier than it looked. I opened it under the lamp. It was the supply contract, not a small one. A long-term exclusive agreement for the mill to provide finished hardwood components, an enormous volume of them on a locked multi-year term. The buyer was a furniture chain, a big one, growing fast, opening stores across 3 states. I'd seen their trucks on the highway. Everyone had. The contract was airtight, exclusive source, heavy penalties for breaking it. My father had negotiated it quietly over his last 2 years, using contacts from 40 years in the lumber trade, and signed it into the mill I now owned. My tired little mill wasn't a debt pit. It was the only spine holding up a chain's entire flagship product line. I sat there letting it sink in. And then I saw the buyer's full name printed at the top of the page, and everything in me went cold and still at once. It was the same furniture chain Damon had been talking about for the last year, the one he'd bet his whole future on, the expansion he'd whispered about at Dad's bedside. Damon had signed on as their regional distributor. He'd staked everything, the house, the cars, all of it, on moving that chain's furniture. And the furniture couldn't exist without the wood. The wood came from one mill. My mill. Damon had built his empire on a foundation he didn't own. He'd spent a year selling himself as the man who controlled the family's supply, and he had no idea, none, that the man who actually controlled it was the brother he'd just handed an envelope in front of the whole family. The question sat in my chest like a stone. Did Damon know? 2 weeks later, Damon threw a housewarming in the home he'd just inherited. Our home. The one on Foster Lane with the clock that ran fast. He'd already redone the kitchen, knew everything paid for on credit against a future he thought was locked in. I went because Sophie asked me to. Don't give them the satisfaction of your absence, she said. She's smarter than me. The house was full. Same relatives, better wine. Damon worked the room like a candidate. And then, of course, he found me by the window. Everybody, he called out, one arm sweeping toward me. You all remember my brother, the envelope man. Laughter. Warm, easy laughter. Ranata beamed. Poor guy got a piece of paper, Damon went on grinning. Meanwhile, that mill of his is one bad month from the auction block. Am I right, Carter? Tell him, how's business? The room turned to me, ready to feel sorry. I set my glass down and smiled easy as him. Business is good, actually, I said. Better than people think. Damon laughed harder. Sure it is. You'd be surprised what people need, I said. Especially chains, growing ones. They need a steady source. I let that sit a half second. By the way, how's your supply situation these days? For the expansion? The laughter kept going around us, but Damon stopped. Just for a moment. His grin froze at the corners. His eyes narrowed a fraction, searching my face, trying to figure out what I knew and how I could possibly know it. Fine, he said too quickly. It's handled. Good, I said. Glad to hear it. I picked my glass back up and turned to the window. Behind me, I heard Damon change the subject louder than he needed to. He'd felt the floor shift under his feet, and he didn't know why. I did. The calls started that week. First my aunt, then a cousin, then an uncle I hadn't spoken to since a wedding in 2016. Carter, honey, my aunt said. Why are you making this so hard on Damon? Just sell him the mill and let the family heal. Nobody's fighting, I said. I'm keeping what's mine. That's not what Damon says. He says you're being difficult. Greedy, even. There it was. Greedy. The word spread through the family like a cold. Within days, the story had rewritten itself. Damon wasn't the man who took the house and the money. I was the man clinging to a worthless mill out of spite, breaking the family's heart. Ranata was the author. I could hear her in every phrasing. Poor Damon grieving, just trying to bring things together, and Carter won't let go. She turned my father's careful gift into evidence of my stubbornness. Sophie was furious for me. They're rewriting everything, she said. They took everything, and they're calling you the greedy one. Let them talk, I said, my father's words. The truth arrives on its own. But it stung. I won't pretend it didn't. You can know you're right and still feel the whole family close its door on you. I ate dinner alone that week more than once, the envelope's contents locked back in the safe, wondering if holding the line was worth being the villain in everyone's story. Then, on a Thursday evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, out-of-state area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Mr. Lennox, a man's voice said. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm the head of purchasing for a furniture retailer you supply. I think we need to talk about your mill. I sat down slowly. I'm listening, I said. Marcus Hale was direct. I liked him for it. I'll be straight with you, he said. I'm doing a supplier audit. Your mill is our exclusive source for the hardwood in our flagship line. If you sneeze, our whole fall catalog catches a cold. I'm aware of the contract, I said. Good. Because I've got a problem, and I think you can clear it up. He paused. Our distribution side keeps telling us the supply is locked down through a family relationship, that the mill and the distributor are, quote, all in the family. I need to confirm that chain of control before we expand the order. My grip tightened on the phone. Which distributor told you that? I asked. I already knew. A man named Damon Lennox, Marcus said. Your brother, I assume? He's my brother, I said. But he doesn't control this mill. He never has. I own it, outright. He has no say in what leaves this yard. The line went quiet for a moment. That's not what he's been telling us, Marcus said slowly. He's been representing that he controls the source. We've made commitments based on that. Then he's been selling you something he doesn't have, I said. I could hear Marcus recalculating on the other end, a year of promises rearranging themselves in his head. Mr. Lennox, he said carefully, would you be willing to come to a meeting? Both of you. We need to understand exactly who controls what before this goes any further. I'll be there, I said. He doesn't know you own it, does he? Marcus said. It wasn't really a question. No, I said. Not yet. We set it for the following Thursday. I hung up and sat in the quiet mill for a long time. Damon had sold a chain of story about controlling his family. Now the family was about to walk into the room. Let me pause here for a second. Just you and me. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who did the quiet work while somebody else took the credit, then you already know the feeling in my chest that week. It isn't anger, it's something steadier than anger. If this story is speaking to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. And do me a favor, drop one word in the comments, stayed. I want to see how many of us there are. Now back to it. Once I knew what to look for, Damon's whole picture came into focus. I made some calls of my own. An old friend at the bank, a supplier who knew the furniture trade. A few careful questions. Nothing underhanded, just a man learning about the industry he'd apparently been feeding for 2 years. Here's what I put together. Damon hadn't just signed on as a distributor, he'd gone all in. He'd taken out loans against the house the day it cleared probate. He'd leveraged the cars, the savings, everything Dad left him. He'd promised the chain enormous volume and fast growth, and he'd promised it on the strength of a supply line he swore he controlled. If that supply held, Damon would be rich. Genuinely rich for the first time. If it broke, he'd lose all of it. The house, the cars, the money, his name in the industry. Everything Dad had handed him would evaporate inside a year. That was why he wanted my mill so badly. That was the desperation under the charm. He wasn't trying to add a debt pit to his collection. He was trying to plug the one hole that could sink his whole ship before anyone noticed the water. It wasn't simple greed. It was fear wearing greed's coat. And somehow, that made it sadder. The night before the meeting, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. Damon's number. I almost didn't play it. His voice came through low, none of the showroom polish left in it. Carter, it's me. Look, I'm in trouble. I need that mill. A long pause. Breathing. Call me back. Please. Please? I'd never once heard my brother say please. I sat with the phone in my hand and my father's letter in my head. Don't let them rush you. Let the truth arrive on its own. I didn't call him back. Sophie came by the mill the next morning with 2 coffees. She's 29, sharp as a chisel, and she'd watched this family treat me like furniture her whole life. She set the coffee down and got right to it. He called you, didn't he? Begging. He did. Good, her eyes flashed. Let him sink, Dad, after everything. After the envelope, the greedy talk, all of it. You don't owe him a rope. I understood the anger. I'd earned the right to it myself. And for a minute, standing in the mill I'd bled for, I let myself imagine it. Walking into that meeting, telling the chain the truth, watching Damon lose everything, the way he'd have let me lose everything. It would have been justice, in a rough way. But I kept hearing my father. I'm not going to sink him, I said. Sophie stared at me. Why not he do it to you? Probably, I said. But there are 20 men in this yard who need this mill running. There's your grandfather's name on that sign. And there's the man I want to be when I look in the mirror. I picked up my coffee. I'm not doing this to destroy Damon. I'm doing it to stop letting him decide who I am. So what? You just forgive him? No, I said. Forgiving and rescuing aren't the same thing. I'll tell the truth, all of it, and then I'll set the terms. His choices are his. I looked at her. I won't sink him, but I won't drown for him either. Sophie was quiet a moment. Then she nodded slow, the way Uncle Ray nodded. That's a better answer than mine, she admitted. Took me 58 years to get there, I said. The meeting was in 2 days. I had a folder to prepare and a brother who still thought I was the envelope man. The chain scheduled the meeting for Thursday at their regional office. Marcus called to confirm. Both suppliers and distributors in one room, he said, to sort out the supply question for good before they signed off on the expansion. Senior people would be there. Legal would be there. And Damon, I asked. Invited, Marcus said. He thinks it's a routine expansion review, a celebration almost. He doesn't know the audit turned up anything. So Damon would walk in expecting a victory lap. He'd stand up, shake hands, talk about the family supply he controlled, and pitch the bigger numbers. And at some point in that room, in front of the people holding his entire future, he'd learn that the man who actually held the supply was sitting 3 chairs away with sawdust under his fingernails. I spent Wednesday getting ready, not to humiliate him, to be clear. I made clean copies of the ownership transfer, notarized 2 years back. I made copies of the supply contract, signed by my father, naming the mill as sole source. I put my father's letter in the folder too, not as a weapon, just so the truth would be complete. Then I called Uncle Ray. They'll say I forged it, I told him, or that Dad wasn't in his right mind. Then I'll tell them what I saw, Ray said. I was in the room when your father signed it. Clear as day, 2 years ago, no fog on him at all. His hand, his choice, his witness. A pause. I've been waiting to say it out loud. I thanked him. He grunted, which is Ray for, "You're welcome." That night I laid the folder on the kitchen table and looked at it a long time. The meeting was Thursday. Damon still thought I was the envelope man. He was about to find out what was in the envelope. I didn't sleep much Wednesday night. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder and a cold cup of coffee, and I thought about my father. About the 2 years he'd spent building something quiet while everyone praised the loud sun. About how he'd known exactly how the will would land, the laughter, the pity, the envelope, and he'd let it happen anyway, because he trusted me to hold the line. I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be in that room. I could walk in swinging. I could lay out the contract, expose the lie, and let the chain drop Damon like a hot pan. He'd lose everything. It would feel, for about an hour, like winning. But my father hadn't handed me a weapon. He'd handed me a foundation. There's a difference, and I finally understood it at that kitchen table. I wasn't going in to end my brother. I was going in to stop disappearing, to stand up straight, tell the plain truth, and let the truth do what it does. I organized the folder one more time. Ownership transfer on top, supply contract behind it. Uncle Ray on speed dial, ready to drive over and witness if they doubted the signature. I decided 3 things before I turned off the light. I would not raise my voice. I would not lie, not even by leaving things out. And I would not beg, and I would not gloat. Whatever Damon had done, I'd say it flat and true, and then I'd offer him a door. What he did with the door was on him. I put the folder by the front door where I couldn't forget it. Then I lay awake a while longer, hearing my father say the same 3 words on a loop. Hold the line. Tomorrow I would. Damon called Thursday morning, an hour before the meeting. Carter. The showroom voice was back, but stretched thin over something frantic. Last chance to be smart. Sell me the mill. Today. I'll double my offer. Cash fast done. You don't have double, I said. You've got loans. Silence. A sharp little intake of breath. How do you... He stopped himself. Doesn't matter. Look, I've got a big meeting today. Important people. If the mill's under my name by tonight, everything's clean. Everybody wins, including you. I'm not selling the mill, Damon. You don't understand what's riding on this. he snapped, the mask slipping. This isn't your little workshop. This is real money, real business. You'll sink us both. I understand exactly what's riding on it, I said quietly. Better than you think. That stopped him. I heard him breathing, trying to read me, the way he'd tried to read me at the housewarming. Whatever game you're playing, he said low now, you'll regret embarrassing this family. I mean it. Nobody's playing a game, I said. I'll see you at the meeting. Dead silence. What meeting? He said. I hung up. I drove to the regional office with the folder on the passenger seat. Glass building, nice landscaping, a lobby that smelled like new carpet. Marcus met me at the door and shook my hand. Ready? He asked. Ready, I said. He led me down a hall to a conference room with a long table and a wall of windows. Executives, legal, a few people with notepads, and at the far end, mid-handshake, laughing at his own joke, stood Damon. He turned when the door opened. He saw me. His smile flickered. Then Marcus stepped forward and said to the whole room, Everyone, I'd like you to meet our exclusive supplier and the owner of Lennox Mill, Carter Lennox. The room turned, and my brother's face went white. For a second, nobody moved. Damon stood frozen at the far end of the table, hands still half raised from the handshake he'd been giving. His color drained so fast I actually watched it happen, the confidence sliding off his face like water off glass. Carter, he said. My name came out cracked. What are you doing here? I took the empty seat Marcus pointed me to. I set my folder on the table and folded my hands on top of it. I was invited, I said. Marcus stayed standing. He addressed the room in the flat, careful tone of a man who's done his homework. Before we discuss the expansion, he said, we need to establish the supply chain clearly. Our flagship line depends entirely on one source of hardwood. There is no second source. If that supply stops, the line stops. Heads nodded around the table. This part they knew. During our audit, Marcus continued, we found a discrepancy. We were told the supply was controlled through a family arrangement by our distributor. He glanced at Damon. But the mill has a single legal owner, and it isn't the distributor. Every face at the table turned toward me. Mr. Lennox, Marcus said. For the record, who owns Lennox Mill? I looked down the table at my brother. Then I looked at the executives, holding both our futures in their hands. I do, I said. The mill is mine. It has been for 2 years. The words landed in the room like a dropped plate. A lawyer started flipping pages. An executive murmured to the woman beside him. Damon gripped the back of his chair with both hands. No one was laughing now. There was no envelope man in this room. There was just the man who owned the wood and the man who'd promised something that was never his to promise. The lead executive, a silver-haired woman named Ms. Porter, set down her pen. Mr. Lennox, she said to Damon, for a year you've represented to us that you control the source of our hardwood, that it's secured through your family. We've built our expansion projections on that representation. It is secured, Damon said, his voice climbed. He's my brother, it's family. We'll work it out. That's not the same as control, she said coldly. You told us you own the supply relationship. You don't own anything. She tapped the table. You've been selling us access you never had. Damon looked at me, and for the first time in our lives, he looked truly cornered. Carter, tell them, he said. Tell them we're family. Tell them it's fine. I opened my folder. I slid the ownership transfer down the table to Miss Porter. The notary stamp caught the light. That's the transfer of ownership, I said. Signed and notarized 2 years ago. My father signed the mill over to me before he passed. A lawyer picked it up, studied it, passed it on. He was sick when he signed this, Damon said, quickly grabbing at anything. He wasn't competent. This won't hold. He didn't know what. He was clear, a new voice said from the doorway. Uncle Ray stood there in his good jacket, hat in his hands. I'd asked him to wait in the lobby in case. Marcus had let him in. I witnessed the signing, Ray said, walking to the table. 2 years ago. His mind was sharp as a tack. He knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why. He looked at Damon. He told me you'd try to say otherwise. The room went very still. Damon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The floor he'd been standing on for a year had finally completely given way. "You planned this," he whispered at me. "You set me up." "I didn't set anything up," I said. I kept my voice level. Everyone was watching, and I could feel how easy it would be to twist the knife. I didn't. "I didn't plan a single piece of this," I said. "I ran a mill for 14 years. I paid the crew. I kept the doors open. 2 years ago, my father signed it over to me, and I signed the papers he put in front of me without even reading them because I trusted him." I looked at Damon. I found out what I owned the same night I opened an envelope everyone in the family laughed at. I turned to the executives. "I didn't lie to you," I said. "I didn't come here to sink anyone. You asked who owns the mill. The answer is me. That's all this is. The truth catching up." Miss Porter studied me. "And the supply? Can you deliver the volume for the expansion?" "I can," I said. "I've been delivering it all along. Nothing about the wood changes. The only thing that changes is you know who you're actually dealing with now." Damon was breathing hard. "So this is it," he said bitterly. "Your big moment. Humiliate me in front of everyone. Feel good, Carter?" I looked at my brother a long moment. "No," I said. "It doesn't feel good. You're my brother." And I meant it. There was no joy in it, just a strange, quiet grief for all the years we'd wasted, him performing and me disappearing. "I didn't take anything from you," I said. "I just stopped hiding what I built." The room was silent. Somewhere down the table a pen scratched a note. Miss Porter folded her hands. "Mr. Lennox," she said to me, "given the situation, we'll need to restructure our arrangement, which means we need to decide what happens to your brother's role." Every eye turned back to me. Miss Porter laid it out plainly. "Frankly," she said, "our instinct is to cut the distributor loose entirely. He misrepresented his control of the supply. That's grounds to end the relationship today." She looked at me. "But you own the wood, so this is partly your call. If you want him gone, he's gone." There it was, the door my father warned me about. I could close my hand and end Damon completely. The house, the loans, the name, all of it, would come down within the year. Nobody in that room would blame me. Some of them expected it. Damon wouldn't look at me. He stared at the table, jaw tight, waiting for the blades. I thought about the 20 men in my yard. I thought about my father's name on the sign. I thought about the man I wanted to be when this was over. "I don't want him cut loose," I said. Damon's head came up. "But things change," I said. "He stays on in a limited role, reduced volume under supervision on a probation period. He answers to the mill on supply, not the other way around, and he never again tells anyone he controls something he doesn't." Miss Porter raised an eyebrow. "That's more generous than we'd offer." "He's family," I said simply, "but family with terms. Those are the terms." "Why?" Damon said. His voice was barely there. "After everything, why would you do that?" I looked at him. "Because I'm not you," I said, "and because Dad wouldn't want me to burn down his son to prove a point." Miss Porter nodded slowly and made a note. "We can work with that structure." Damon sat back down like his legs had given out. He didn't say thank you. He couldn't yet. But something in his face had cracked open, and it wasn't the mask this time. It was the man underneath it. The meeting wound down into logistics. Volumes, schedules, contracts to redraft. Marcus shook my hand and said he was glad to finally know who he was working with. Damon waited for me in the parking lot, alone. No Ranata, no audience. Just my brother, leaning against a car that the bank half owned. "I don't understand you," he said. "You had me. You could have ended it." I took my father's letter out of the folder. I'd carried it the whole time and never needed it. I unfolded it and read him the part he'd never heard. "I'm not dividing my love," I read. "I'm giving each of you what you actually need. Your brother needs to be seen, so I gave him that. Carter needs the thing worth keeping." Damon's throat worked. He looked away. "He gave you the house and the money because he knew you needed to feel like the big man," I said. "He gave me the mill because he knew I'd keep it alive. He wasn't ranking us, Damon. There was never a scoreboard. We just spent our whole lives thinking there was." I thought he loved you more, Damon said quietly. Always thought that. So I took everything I could to even it out. He loved us different, I said. That's not the same as less. Uncle Ray had come out to the lot. He stood a few feet off, hat in hand, and heard the last of it. He loved you both, Ray said, just differently. Took your father dying for either of you to see it. Damon put his face in his hands. For the first time since we were boys, my brother cried in front of me, and it wasn't a performance. There was no room to play to. There was just the truth, finally arrived, the way Dad said it always would. The paperwork took a month. The chain signed a new supply contract directly with the mill. My name on it. The terms even stronger than before. They increased the order for the expansion. My tired little mill, the debt pit. The workshop suddenly had a backlog stretching 18 months out. I hired 6 new men that spring. Local guys, some of them sons of the crew I already had. I finally fixed the roof over the drying shed that had leaked for a decade. I gave everyone a raise, the first real one in years. 20 jobs became 26. In a town that size, that's not a statistic. That's 6 families with health insurance. That's kids staying in the school district. That's the difference between a town breathing and a town emptying out. Damon kept his reduced role exactly as I'd said it. He had to learn the actual business, the boring parts, the parts he'd always been too big for. He had to sell his second car. He refinanced the house, kept it, barely. He answered to the mill on supply, and he never oversold again, because he couldn't. It humbled him. I won't pretend it didn't. But humbled isn't ruined, and I'd chosen that on purpose. Sophie started coming by the office to help with the books. She had a head for it. One afternoon, she looked up from a spreadsheet and grinned. You know the mill's worth more than the house now, she said, by a lot. Your grandfather knew that, I said, 2 years before anybody else. I hung his letter on the office wall in a simple frame where I'd see it every morning. Hold the line. I had, and the line held me right back. But there was one more conversation the family still owed me, and it came from the person I least expected. The family that had called me greedy went very quiet. Funny how that works. The same aunts who'd lectured me about healing suddenly had nothing to say. The cousins who'd repeated Ranata's version stopped repeating anything. When the story turned out to have a different ending than they'd been sold, they simply pretended they'd never picked a side. Ranata was the quietest of all. The woman who'd raised her phone to film my humiliation, who'd authored the Greedy Carter campaign one glove touch at a time, now crossed the street when she saw me at the hardware store. A few relatives called with careful sideways apologies. We only heard one side, Carter. You know how Ranata talks. We always knew you were the steady one. Rewriting themselves again, the way they'd rewritten me. Sophie wanted me to make them grovel, to bring up every phone call, every whisper. You could rub their faces in it, she said. They'd deserve it. I could, I said. I'm not going to. Why not? Because their opinion of me was never the thing that mattered, I said. It only hurt because I let it be my mirror. I'm done using their eyes to see myself. Sophie thought about that for a while. So you just let them off the hook? No, I said. I don't owe them my anger, but I don't owe them my closeness either. I looked at her. You don't owe them your anger, just your distance. I didn't cut anyone off with a speech. I just stopped showing up for people who only showed up for a version of me that wasn't real. My calendar got quieter, my chest got lighter. The only person from that old world I still spoke to regularly, it turned out, was the one who'd wronged me most. My brother started calling on Sundays. The first Sunday call was short and awkward. So was the second. By the 5th, Damon actually talked. We met for coffee at a diner halfway between his place and mine. He looked older than he had at the will reading. Less shine, more man. He wrapped both hands around his mug and stared into it a while before he spoke. I need to say some things, he said, and I need you to just let me say them. I nodded. I was jealous of you my whole life, he said, which sounds insane because I had everything and you had the mill. But you had something I couldn't fake. Dad trusted you. Mom leaned on you. You stayed, and everybody knew it, and no amount of new cars covered that up. He turned the mug in his hands. When Dad got sick, I panicked. The expansion was underwater. I told myself if I just got the estate, got the mill, I could fix it before anyone found out. So I sat by his bed and I pushed him. A dying man. His voice broke. I'm not proud of it. I manipulated our father because I was scared and I was drowning. I let him sit in it. I didn't rush to make it comfortable. I know, I finally said. I heard you in the hallway once. The expansion can't wait. I didn't understand it then. I'm sorry, Carter. He looked up. For the envelope thing, the greedy talk, all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I don't, I said. Not all the way. Not yet. He nodded. He'd expected that. But you're here, I said, and you're telling the truth for once. That's a start. I met his eyes. We're not okay yet, but we can start being honest. He almost smiled. That's more than I deserve. Probably, I agreed, and we both finally laughed. There's a moment I keep coming back to from that first good summer. I stood in the middle of the mill on a Tuesday afternoon. Just a Tuesday, no audience, no occasion. The saws were running, the new men were working alongside the old. Sunlight came through the high windows and lit up the sawdust in the air like something out of a church. 26 men, busy and paid and steady. My father's name over the door. The smell of cut oak I've loved my whole life. I'd spent decades being the son nobody bragged about. The steady one. The one who got an envelope. And standing there in the sun, I understood that the envelope had been the truest thing anyone ever handed me. Not because of the deed inside, because of what my father saw when he chose me for it. He saw the man who'd stay, who'd hold the line, who didn't need a house handed to him to know his own worth. I walked into the office and looked at his letter on the wall. Hold the line. 3 words I'd carried like a stone and finally set down as a foundation. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Then another from Damon of all people. There was a family gathering coming up, the first since everything. Cousins, aunts, the whole complicated crowd. They wanted to know if I'd come. A year ago, that question would have twisted my stomach. Would I be welcome, would they whisper? Now it just sat there simple. I'd go, on my own terms, as myself, with nothing to prove and nothing to hide. I'd shake hands with people who'd written me off, and it wouldn't cost me a thing, because I'd stopped handing them the power to price me. I texted back 1 word. Yes. Then I went back out into the sawdust and the light. A year after the will reading, life had found a new shape. The mill was thriving. The expansion had gone through, and the chain had already come back asking about a second product line. I'd stopped worrying about payroll. Some mornings I stood in the yard and had to remind myself it was real. Damon and I weren't the brothers from a greeting card. We never would be. But we were honest with each other, which we'd never once been in 50 years. He'd found his footing in the smaller role, and to his surprise he was better at the real work than the performance. Losing the shine had in a strange way given him something solid to stand on. The family had settled into a quieter arrangement. I saw them at the big gatherings. I was warm and I was distant, and I learned those 2 things could live together just fine. Ranata still didn't quite meet my eyes. I didn't need her to. Sophie came into the business for real. She took over half the books and started talking about a showroom of our own someday, cutting out the middleman entirely. She had my father's instinct for the quiet, patient play. I'd hung his letter where she'd see it too. I never got the house, never got the cash or the truck. I never needed to prove any of that was unfair, because the mill outgrew all of it, and because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped measuring my life against my brother's. The scoreboard my whole family had lived by, the one I'd believed in for 58 years, turned out to be imaginary. My father never kept it. He just gave each of his sons the thing that fit him, and trusted us to grow into it. I finally did. I still have the envelope. The plain white one, worn soft at the edges, now empty of everything it once held. I keep it in the top drawer of the office desk. Every so often I take it out and turn it over in my hands, the way I did that gray November morning, while my whole family waited for me to break. They thought it was worthless. And for a while, standing in that living room, I almost believed them. It turned out to be everything, but not because of the deed inside, or the contract, or the money that came after. It was everything because of what it taught me about worth. That mine was never in that envelope, that it was never theirs to hand me and never theirs to take away. My father knew that before I did. He spent his last 2 years making sure that when the family finally priced me at one envelope, the joke would quietly land on them. Not to punish anyone, to free me. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me. Maybe you're the one who stayed in your family too. If you are, I hope you heard this clearly. Your worth was never in that envelope, and it was never theirs to hand you. If this story meant something, subscribe and tell me in the comments, was my father right to do it this way? And if you want another story about quiet people who finally stand tall, there's one waiting in the description. I'll see you there. I put the envelope back in the drawer and slide it shut. My name is Carter Lennox, and I was never the failure. I was just the one who stayed.